Mr. Spielberg, we are tremendously honored and thrilled and moved that you are able to join us at the end of this Bucharest screening of West Side Story. I think it's midnight. I have here a list of questions sent by Romanian fans of your films during the last few days, and I'll read them to you. I think it's the first time you're going to be answering the questions of a Romanian audience, of Romanian fans. My name is Andre, and it is my great honor to moderate this meeting. I also have a few questions of my own, and if that's okay with you, I'll start with those. But not before thanking you again for having joined us. It's an incredibly special occasion, and speaking for myself, I'm nearly overwhelmed with emotion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor.
Okay, so my first question, it's a bit unnatural that I have to look at the camera, whereas you're on the big screen behind me. But yeah, I'll try to do my best. So the first question is a little long-winded. I'll try to keep the others shorter. So ever since Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and the wonderful Busby Berkeley homage with which it opens, many film lovers must have been dreaming of a Steven Spielberg musical. So the obvious question would be, why was the wait so long? But perhaps it's not even right to think of West Side Story as your first film in this genre, as your first musical, considering that you've always been a master of highly choreographed kineticism, and that, of course, your collaborations with composer John Williams are one of the great director-composer relationships in the history of cinema. So the question would be, to what extent has all that prepared you for West Side Story? Would you say that your work has always had affinities with the musical? I'm also thinking about another early film, 1941, which earlier than Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which contains a great chase, a great crazy slapstick chase on a dance floor. So yeah, the question is, to what extent is West Side Story a new departure for you?
Well, first of all, let me just say I'm honored to be here, to be speaking to everyone here in Bucharest. I owe a lot of this to my friend Christian Munju. He served with me a number of years ago on my jury. I was the president of the jury at Cannes, and he was on my jury. We became acquaintances and then friends, and I've learned a lot about Romanian films because of Christian, so I wanted to give him a shout out first of all. Thank you, Christian. I'm here because of you. So I also like to be able to answer your question in a way that doesn't seem... let me ask you this. Is there a delay when I speak? Is there translation, or is it just going right out in my language to you?
It's right in English. It's right in English, no translation.
Okay, good. Well, you said so yourself when you framed the question to me. All movies, all the films I've certainly made are choreographed. I don't think I've made a film, not just action sequences, but I don't think I've ever blocked actors in a sequence, in a complicated dialogue scene that I don't consider to be choreography. So I have always admired the directors of the old days that made an art from the science of choreography, the way they moved characters in and out of frame. And in a sense, I've studied choreography, not dance choreography, but blocking, as if it was dance. And so even though it took me years and years and years to work up the courage to actually ask the holders of the rights to West Side Story, to ask them would I be able to reimagine their great Broadway musical, I had really been preparing myself for many, many years to do a musical. And you're right, I did one. There's a dance number in 1941. There's a dance number with my wife, who was not my wife then. She played Willie Scott in Temple of Doom, and she danced that number, choreographed by the great choreographer Danny Daniels. And there's even a dance sequence in my movie Ready Player One in a zero gravity nightclub.
It's true, yeah.
To the Bee Gees. So I have been flirting with a musical my whole life, but I only wanted to make a musical from a text that I love and respect. And my favorite musical, my favorite not movie musical, although I do love West Side Story, directed by Robert Wise and Jerome Robbins, but my favorite Broadway musical of all time is West Side Story. And I felt the West Side Story, what it said in 1957, had even more meaning and relevance in 2019. When we started shooting in 19. So that's just by way of saying, to answer your question, yes, I have been wanting to do a musical my whole life, but I was prepared to do this one because of how I feel about choreography.
So you always knew it was going to be West Side Story?
Yes, always. It took me 20 years to get the courage, work up the nerve, to even go over to Stephen Sondheim's house and ask him if I could earn his blessing to be able to reimagine West Side Story. So it was always going to be West Side Story.
You describe a memory of watching Lawrence of Arabia in your teens, so in the early 60s, in your teens, and you are watching Lawrence of Arabia in a big theater with a big audience, and you describe a moment in which the audience, right after a particularly intense and grueling desert crossing episode, the audience left their seats and collectively rushed to the concession stand to get refreshments and then returned for the rest of the film. So David Lean's art had made everybody thirsty at the same time. And you describe this moment like an epiphany. Is this memory, does it truly lie very close to the heart of what makes films great for you?
Well, that was a moment I've never experienced before or since. But there's never been a movie like Lawrence of Arabia before or since. It's one of the great epic classic films ever made, I think. It's one of my favorite films. David Lean's one of my favorite directors. But that was because the effectiveness, the way Lean shot the crossing of the Nefu Desert of 40 days on camel. And remember, they said after a certain amount of days, the camels will start to die and then we will start to die. That was a line from the movie. And it was a long sequence. You really survived that crossing. And people were parched when it was over. And I was with my dad, I guess in 62 when the film came out. And people, including my father, I stayed in my seat. My dad got up too. People were getting up, 30, 40, 50, 100 people out of the theater of 800, at least within my my peripheral vision. And they kept getting up, almost like they were walking out. But they weren't walking out. They came back 5-10 minutes later with soft drinks, with Pepsis, with Cokes, with 7-Ups. You could hear the ice, as they were going back to the seats, the ice hitting the sides of the cups. And it was an experience I'll never forget. That's why I wrote about it. But I also wrote about it because it showed the power of, once again, what movies can inspire us to do, how we react. We can even physically, some films can physically make you ill, some films can physically break your heart, some films can physically make you cry. And I think we laugh harder, we cry harder, and I think we feel more when we're all watching movies together, especially when we don't know each other. I just think it's a greater experience.
One of the questions left by film lovers or by Steven Spielberg fans uploaded on the festival platform during the last few days. So it goes like this. Dear Steven, if you had the opportunity today to reshoot any scene from any of your movies, which one would it be and why?
Oh my, that's a great question. Wow. Well, I'd reshoot half of Hook, at least. I think that, you know, they say that I don't watch a lot of my own films, I have to tell you that. I see my films so many times when I'm making them and cutting them together and correcting the color, and then I take a long hiatus. I don't watch my films again, and I'll come back a couple of years later. Often my kids, I have 6 grandkids now, and they always want to see E.T., so I've seen E.T. a lot with a lot of my kids. And that's a good example of something, there's no scene in that I would want to reshoot, because I'm really happy with that movie. But I also know that I have a different point of view when years go by and I see one of my films again. I suddenly see a solution to something that I couldn't find the solution for when I was making the movie. And with distance, with objectivity, and with wisdom as I've grown up and gotten older, I suddenly see, oh my God, that's exactly how I should have shot that 25 years ago. And then I immediately have to stop myself and say, but 25 years ago, I was a different person than I am today. And so I can't take what I know now and apply it to what I didn't know then, because it's just not fair. All art has to be a measurement of who the artist is at the time, not who the artist, is, 20 years, in the future. So yes, there's a lot of scenes. If I saw a lot of my movies, there's a lot of scenes I probably would wish to have done again, but I would never take that opportunity, because that basically is exactly who I was then. And we're never the same people. From year to year, we're not even the same people.
Do you have any favorite Romanian movie? Asks someone.
I haven't seen a lot of Romanian movies. I mean, I saw a movie. I saw a movie kind of recently, a couple of years ago, by I think it was Cristi Puiu, and it was an interesting movie about a guy that could not find a hospital who would treat him. I think it was called the Death of Lazarescu. Is that right?
The Death of Mr. Lazarescu. Yes.
Lazarescu. And I love that. I love that picture. It was just because I'm a hypochondriac, so that really appealed to me. The worst thing that could possibly happen is what happened to that character, that old man. That was, so I like Christie's films. I like Christian Mundra's films, as I've told you before. I love Graduation, all the things he's done. And there's an older, I think he died a number of years ago, but you have to help me with his pronunciation. Niculescu. I think his name is Sergio Niculescu. He made Romanian films.
Sergio Niculescu?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Okay.
He made a film called The Last Crusade. I believe it was the story of Prince Michael.
An epic, a big epic.
Michael the Brave.
The American title was Last Crusade, indeed.
That Last Crusade, yes. So I've seen several of his pictures. And
did you discover that because of your own film, which with Last Crusade in the title, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, did it lead you to the American title, to the American version of Michael the Brave?
No, I think I saw Michael the Brave before I made The Last Crusade. But there's a lot I need to learn from the culture of Romania in terms of filmmaking. But ever since I met Christian, I've sort of been much more aware of the legacy of films during the communist era, before and after in Romania.
One more question from the audience. It's a more general question. It says, what advice would you give to a filmmaking student?
Oh my God. First of all, know that you love it. And if you don't think you love it, do something else. Because it is a business that requires a lot of tolerance for ups and downs, for great joy and great heartbreak, for disappointments and for great self-learning. But it's a tough business to break into. So you gotta just love it. You have to really know that you don't care what happens, you're gonna stick with it until you're able to tell your stories and get people to watch the stories that you're telling. And once again, use this. This doesn't cost anything except what it costs to buy it. And you can make your movies on this, and there's all kinds of affordable software to cut your films together, to put music into it. You can just, all the tools are right there for all of us today. And show us who you are. Because every single film shows who the person is. Even if you make a movie that has nothing to do with your life, that has nothing to do with other films you've seen that influenced you. And even if you're doing a movie outside of your comfort zone, in a genre you've never ever dreamt of showing, you will come out in the wash for the film you make. Because that's how powerful people are. Whatever we think we're not telling about ourselves through the films we make, forget it. You're telling everything about yourself in the films you make. And it's a beautiful way to get to know yourself and to have other people get to know you. And I just recommend it to everyone. I have 7 kids, only one's a director. I thought I'd have at least 5 by now, but only one has decided to direct. But I know that she right now, she's 25 and she is having the time of her life. And she's really realizing so much about herself that she didn't know before. Film does that.
Oh, one more question. Could you tell us about AI? It's about, I know that you wrote the script and it was based on a lot of material that Stanley Kubrick left specifically for you to make the film. And it was extended treatment, I think, of the story, but there were also a lot of drawings, so a highly developed visual concept of the film. What did Stanley Kubrick leave for you to work with?
Well, I had known Stanley for a number of years before that. I met Stanley actually on the set under construction of The Shining. I actually met him when I was looking at the sound stages at Elstree Studios in Bournemouth, and I found out that Stanley Kubrick was on a set he was about to make a movie called The Shining from. And so I talked my way into getting introduced to Stanley, met him the first day on that set. It was the Overlook, the main room of the Overlook Hotel was all finished. And I met Stanley that day, and we struck up a relationship, became really friendly. And many telephone calls, hours and hours and hours of telephone calls over the years. And Stanley had never asked me for anything. And then one day he asked me if I would take a look at a treatment that he had written based on a short story by Brian Aldiss called Super Toys Last All Summer Long. That was the name of the short story. Because he was looking for an American writer. And I read the short story, and I sent some names that I thought would be good for Stanley. And Stanley met with 3 or 4 of the candidates. I remember sending names in. He had phone calls with some of the candidates, some of the writers. Then he essentially decided to do it himself. But because of that, Stanley started letting me in on, there was a beautiful manga artist named Chris Baker under the name Fangora. His pen name is Fangora. You can look him up, you can Google Chris Baker. And Chris had already done with Stanley, collaborated with Stanley, 1,500 individual storyboards for AI. And when Stanley started to change his mind about directing it and wanted to produce it instead, he sent me all the storyboards in a huge box, which I went through and then flew to London, and Stanley and I started to collaborate. The plan would be he would write it and produce it, and I would direct it, and that was the plan. And I kept trying to talk Stanley back into directing it. And Stanley kept resisting that because he wanted to do this other film.
That must have been Eyes Wide Shut, the other film.
It was Eyes Wide Shut. That was what he really had his sights set on. So he kept talking me into directing it. I kept trying to talk him into directing it. And then he passed away after he had finished directing Eyes Wide Shut, and he passed away. And then I went to the funeral. I flew in to lay Stanley to rest in his backyard, actually, in St. Albans, where he lives. And I had known Christian and Jan Harlow, his brother-in-law, for many years before that. And then about a year later, both Christian and Jan Harlow called me and asked me, would I be interested in taking the reins of AI where Stanley left off. And I had a very tough time saying no to that.
Thank you.
One day when COVID is really, really over, I'm sure Christian is going to get me to Bucharest to pay you all of this.